I am very excited to introduce our first speaker, who is Joy Chevalier, who is the founder and CEO of the Cook's Nook, which is Central Texas's first culinary incubator. Since its inception in 2017, it has incubated, led to the success of 80 food culinary businesses. Joy is an incredible powerhouse of a woman, from running for state comptroller and being incredibly active in the community on 5,000 boards, I counted, and really, she's on Google Refresh, has a big background in technology because she worked at Dell too in product. She's just also one of my heroes in life. And when COVID hit, it was because of Joy reaching out and creating plans and creating partnerships that created Keep Austin Together, that led to making sure that 250,000 meals delivered over the last year to people who were impacted by COVID, 310,000 meals scheduled to be created and delivered this next year. She's just absolutely incredible. And so I'm very honored to get to introduce her. Take it away, Joy.
Hello. Thank you, ma'am. You are very kind, my good friend Jess. First off, thank you guys for having me here tonight. I'm very, very excited. I've been in Austin 30 something years, and it's my first time to actually get to speak to you guys. So I'm pretty chuffed. Tonight, we get to talk about something that's very near and dear to me. As just mentioned, I did my PhD studies at the University of Texas, and then I ended up working as a technologist for 18 years, of various startups, eventually at Dell. And then I decided to move to food and the intersection of food and technology. We had a saying in our team when we would sit in meetings that would just go on forever. One of them was, we are not feeding the hungry, and we are not putting shoes on children, and we're not curing cancer here, folks. We are making widgets and selling computers. And then finally one day I said, maybe we should go do those things. You know, I'm all about feeding people. Let's go do that and figure out how to do that. And so went off and decided to figure out how to take everything I knew and how to use technology and the technology processes as a product strategist to create the environment that we have over at the Cook's Nook. And so, over the years, this idea of food and tech, those intersections, not just the hardware, not just software, but the processes of innovation, of rapid getting to market, rapid development, the things that we know how to do very well in technology are brought to bear in the food space for the food space's benefit and for our society, for our cultures, for entrepreneurs' benefit, for business benefit, for everybody's benefit. So that's what we're going to get to talk about tonight. And just to put a few concepts on the table for you guys, some of the big concepts that are being talked about in the arena of food and technology. Digital and physical food security. These are one of the areas that we have not yet totally cracked. These are national security issues. When we talk about interoperability, we talked about it in pure tech, but it's here too. How do all the parts and pieces actually speak to each other? That's something that food had not sort of solved amongst itself. How do we secure that chain? How do we have operational efficiency, that it doesn't happen in silos, that this has been a sector where they have not seen previously the need to really communicate and own a communication relationship between the parts and pieces. But it is to their benefit to do so. We know what that means in pure tech. What does it mean in food and tech? That includes data protection as well. Supply chain transparency in a sector which you typically hid information and you hid that knowledge. What does it mean to be transparent, and what's the benefit of transparency, right? Broadband expansion. You wouldn't think of broadband actually being very important in food and technology. But when you start to talk about rural access, food production, labor, you talk about healthcare, you talk about food outcomes and production, and attaching that production to the rest of the system, that broadband and broadband access becomes extremely important. Having a digitally skilled workforce in and of itself, incredibly important. Talk about sustainability, again, in that labor maneuverability within the sector. CBD, another huge big arena that is food and tech is all the rage. From finance to legalization to production, viability of variants, chain management, and even what it means to equity. When we talk about equity amongst groups of people, and who's been farming and doing that work the longest, and who and how people benefit. Um, and then we talked about this before, Jay and I, we tossed that word out there. We're going to come back to it a lot, I suspect, and that's the word resiliency. What does equity mean? What does access mean? Food insecurity and those health outcomes. At the end of the day, all we do comes back to humans and what do humans need and how do we do that efficiently, effectively, with good outcomes. So with that said, put those ideas out there. I'm going to introduce our first speaker. Um, that is Mark Oshima. Mark is back there somewhere. He is with Arrow Farms. He's the founder and CMO of Arrow Farms. He's also been the founder of Chefs Collaborative, which I didn't know until I had to go look that up. And I actually used to be a part of Chefs Collaborative, which is really cool. And also he's on the advisory board of the New York City Food Bank as well. And he's going to talk about what they do and put all this in context from a real perspective. So Mark, you out there somewhere?
Oh, you got to take yourself off mute, Mark.
Is he talking?
Okay,
Yeah.
there you go.
You're talking.
Well, that's great. Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Jay. Thank you, Jessica. But thank you, Joy, for that introduction as well. Really appreciated your sentiment, though, in terms of closing. Like at the end of the day, it's about humanizing, the work we're doing, and technology is an enabler, right? But how we can have impact. And so today, I'm going to share with you a little bit around the background of Arrow Farms and work we're doing from a vertical farming standpoint. So I'm going to share my screen, go through a few slides, and then we're going to have an amazing lineup of other speakers as well to talk about impact that they're having. And then we'll have Q&A at the end. So I'll share my screen now as well. And so just confirming that's working as intended. You guys are seeing my screen? Okay.
Perfect.
Great. So, part of this thesis in terms of what we're doing with vertical farming, it's not only vertical farming we're taking to new heights, we're taking agriculture to new heights. And how we're doing that, we're thinking about how do we unlock technology. But with any business, it first starts fundamentally with what are the challenges? What are the issues that you're trying to address? These are some of the macro considerations when we talk about year-round availability, inconsistent quality, overuse of pesticides. We lost a third of our arable land in the last 40 years. Water usage, 70% of fresh water goes to agriculture, 70% of the pollution is coming from agriculture. We think about weather, climate change, we think about food waste. But now we put it in the lens of what we're just talking about in terms of COVID-19 and the pandemic, right? And so this idea of resiliency, our food systems are more challenged than ever before. And we need to think about new paradigms and how do we break through. And it's exciting to think about the work that Hugh's doing with South by Southwest in terms of, again, helping put a spotlight on these issues as well. We need to increase awareness about what are these challenges and potentially what are some of the solutions. And so when we think about Arrow Farms, it's thinking about a new way of farming, a new paradigm, and trying to think about how can we do more with less. And when we talk about indoor vertical farming, we're talking about growing in warehouses. We're converting these warehouses. This is about enabling local production. Our global headquarters, we're based in Newark, New Jersey. We have multiple farms. We're looking at the 9th farm that we built out. This was the world's largest indoor vertical farm based on annual production. And this is the idea that we can create an amazing connection in the community with food, and technology is allowing us to do that. And so a little bit about a history of the company.
Hey,
we're
Mark,
certified
Mark,
yep.
It might help people with smaller screens if you go into presentation mode. And just making sure, is your deck still on the title slide?
Oh, so I've been changing slides. So okay. If that has not been happening,
it has not.
And I'm in presentation mode. So thanks for the heads up. Because on my screen, it's all consuming. Let me just maybe unshare and then I can reshare. Are we seeing the screen now?
We are seeing the fourth slide, but it's not in presentation mode yet.
Yep.
Are you sharing a different screen? Are you using a two-screen setup?
No. So at this point, it should be in the presentation mode. Is that correct?
Now we're in the presenter mode. You're sharing the presenter mode. I think you're sharing the wrong screen.
All right. So you're seeing my screen plus the next slide. Is that what it is?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. Same thing or no?
That's still presenter mode. We can go back to the other one. I just was trying to help people that have smaller screens.
Yeah, sorry about that. Let me, this is why we always have a tech call first, right? All right.
That was it.
Yeah, display settings.
That display settings. There you go.
Yeah.
Swap, I think.
Swap?
Right?
Yep.
All right. This is the tech forum, right? So
yeah,
there you
perfect.
go.
Now we see the Sustainable Development Goals.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go back to this slide then.
Perfect. We like the pictures.
And yeah, this is, and I'm glad that you mentioned that you weren't seeing this, because this is really helping paint the picture when we talk about indoor vertical farming. This idea that we can convert warehouses, create year-round production, create year-round jobs, and create amazing impact within the community. I was sharing that, we're a certified B Corporation as well. So we're always thinking about all of our stakeholders, we're mission driven. And this idea that we can really bring the food into the communities is a really important idea of, again, how do you change behavior? And that idea of humanizing it is, again, access. And how do you increase access is one of the most important elements here. And so we work with all the major supermarkets, we work with institutions. It's really about how we can democratize access to good, healthy food. And we'll talk a little bit more about the technology in a moment. But just as a company, and we had seen the slide and I gave you a little bit of a preview about, we're doing this in the context of not only what we're doing here in the United States, but within a broader context of the UN and the Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 in total, but we think we directly impact 12, very specifically with our business. And so this is an opportunity about how we can develop a common language when we talk about solutions and thinking about the framework about impact and the work we're doing. At the heart of it, it's about how we can transform communities. It's really about how we can partner effectively with public as well as even private institutions. But here, it's working within the city of Newark, it's working with the New Jersey. We work with many different economic development groups around the United States. And it's, again, this partnership about how we can create jobs, drive economic development, really serve as an inspiration in the community about how we can repurpose. I mentioned these warehouses, a lot of them are abandoned. We think about manufacturing has disappeared and gone to the wayside. We can breathe new life back into these buildings and really create be a catalyst in terms of further growth. To give you a sense of these buildings, one of the farms that we share with you is a former steel mill. And the idea that we can convert that into a state-of-the-art, cutting-edge, productive farm is at the heart of how we can think about leveraging technology, do things very differently. And each one of our buildings has a different story, which is a great part of that lens of repurposing buildings. We have a former Ballantine brewery, former nightclub. Here's the steel mill. But again, that we can think about where we put the farms. It's really we could actually put it on the moon. When Jessica was talking about and joking about people joining us. One of the things that we're really proud about is we actually put them in schools as well. And so we have some of our working farms. Actually, this is an inner city school in Newark, Phillips Academy Charter School. This is a farm that Michelle Obama got a chance to visit before she left office. But what's really incredible about this program, and we've been in here for over 10 years. And so we think about creating not only the next generation of consumers, but the next generation of farmers. So this is really exciting for us when we think about creating inspiration and helping be that catalyst for improvement. We've been fortunate in terms of helping lead the way and getting recognition from Fast Company to Time, but really for that environmental stewardship, global clean tech. And the idea is that, we really have a scorecard about how we're doing. And again, holding ourselves very accountable in that process. So I want to talk a little bit more about the technology. And saw some questions and people interested in actually aeroponics. A lot of people don't know aeroponics. Aeroponics is a type of hydroponics. It differs. We had some questions come in even before the event about, how does this differ from aquaponics? All are means of delivering, nutrients through water, right? And so hydroponics, in this way of, kind of, you think about the gardens of Babylon, right? Growing in water has been around for a long time. We're taking technology to be able to elevate this. And so aeroponics, we're actually misting the roots, and we're actually able to deliver a much more targeted way of delivering that water, be much more judicious, with that, and use just a fraction of the water, 95% less in the field, even 40% less than hydroponics. And the idea that we can grow a wide range of different products, we've actually grown over 550 different types of crops. Our commercial farms that you see are focused on leafy greens, and there's some very specific reasons for that. We talk about beds stacked. That's one of the aspects in terms of how we get greater productivity. This is a way of farming where we actually can think about for leafy greens, for example. We talk about even the theme for tonight of faster. We can take baby leafy greens that out in the field may take 30 to 45 days to grow. We can actually grow that exact same crop in 12 to 14 days. So we're talking about a half or even a third of the time by being able to deliver exactly what the plant needs and creating the optimal environment from a growing standpoint. Plants don't need sunlight. We're delivering the right spectrum of light through LED lighting, and even that is a proprietary approach. So everything that you see here and everything that was shown with you in the large scale farming, this is proprietary technology that AeroFarms has developed to really kind of think very differently about farming and inputs. When I was talking about misting the roots, this is an example of what a healthy root system actually looks like. And you can actually see a few of the droplets of water. But again, this idea that we could be so targeted, even down to the micron size of that droplet, to be able to enhance absorption of not only the water, but also nutrients, and understanding, again, what are the macro micronutrients the plant needs. And the things that we're doing is harnessing technology in a very different way in terms of really revolutionizing agriculture. So we're using new tools like machine vision, machine learning, and AI to be able to understand the plants. We're doing imaging of the plants. We're able to do predictive analytics around those plants. We're going to hear more from Charles, on some of the tools and applications around this as well. But allows us then to be able to deliver very high quality, very high level of consistency all year round. And these are developed into what we call algorithms or growing algorithms. These recipes then allow us to be able to have a very differentiated product in the marketplace. We can think about accentuating that product for taste, for texture, even for nutrients. And these are things that the field farmer, unfortunately, aren't focused on because they're thinking about, is it drought resistant? Is it mildew resistant? Can it withstand a very complex supply chain? And so we're putting flavor at the forefront, celebrating that. But things like nutrition, because of this growing environment, here's some examples of our testing versus USDA standard, be able to deliver more vitamin A, more vitamin C than the USDA standard. The idea that we can grow hundreds of different types of crops, it's really about celebrating that biodiversity and richness and flavor. And this is bringing excitement into the category. For leafy greens, our high bar is like no salad dressing is needed. So we're creating different eating occasions. People are now grazing, literally eating right out of the container, the greens by themselves. So the snacking and getting people to enjoy it. And also this mouthfeel, these explosion of flavors. We've had customers call and say, is this what arugula tastes like? It's so peppery. And it's like, well, this is what our arugula is. So we can accentuate those and create some excitement in the category. We're working with top tastemakers, top chefs. That image I was showing before of the machine vision was actually a Ruby Street mustard green. This is something that working with Chef Marcus Samuelson, how it shows up in his dish and making sure that it's delivering the right consistency. We work with top chef David Chang in his restaurants. He became so excited by what we're doing that he actually became an investor. So this idea that we can all of a sudden think about menu planning, going back to the farm, creating different experiences, creating some different excitement. We have a retail brand. We're selling to all the major supermarkets. This is up in the Northeast. So the idea that this is not just for Whole Foods, but ShopRite is the largest mass supermarket in the area. And we also work with different local markets as well. And you can just see that we're celebrating the flavor, the peak flavor always, this perfectly peppery, and this idea of local, and how do we enable that local production? So a tremendous connection. And then just about the company in terms of our work, it's around our impact. We have very much a global lens. We have offices and farms and development in the UAE. We have key partners in Northern Europe, key partners in Asia. And so we think about expanding, the pain points that we see here in the US, and we're going to hear from Rick from Florida, right? We just had a cold spell, like the whole agriculture crops are affected. We can help mitigate and address those and help drive greater resiliency. We're working and partnering very closely with great public institutions like the FAR. This is the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research. Our work with them and our ability to identify stressors of leafy greens to optimize for taste and nutrition really led to this concept of precision plants. And it led to a new consortium called the Precision Indoor Plants Consortium that we're also part of, that is now looking at the next generation of indoor plants and indoor breeding. So we're now looking at not only optimizing the environment, we're looking at optimizing the genetics of the plants as well. I mentioned the work we're doing in Abu Dhabi in building out our farm there. This is actually 100% dedicated to R&D. This will be a 90,000 square foot facility and doing just cutting edge R&D, working with major global partners, also thinking about very much that local and some of the regional challenges, obviously very arid, very access to water, some of the biggest challenges there. The final program that I just want to highlight before closing, and this really talks about the immediacy in terms of access. Really excited about the work we're doing with the World Economic Forum and their Healthy Cities and Communities initiative. We also partnered then with Jersey City in launching the first municipal vertical farming program. So here, not only are we providing access to our greens, we're actually bringing the farms back into the community. And so these farms, 10 of them will be located in municipal buildings, senior assisted living centers, housing projects, as well as schools, and creating a connection, with the food. So you're talking about access, how do you address that last mile? Well, we're bringing the farm right into the community, and they're going to have an incredible connection with the food and how it's grown, and technology is enabling this. So these are all going to be controlled, remotely. We can see what's happening on the farms, but operated by the local community. So great way to think about how we can create a system using technology that's not only faster, better, but also safer, for the community. So happy to share more and excited to learn more from the other speakers tonight. All right.
All right, thank you, Mark. And the next speaker is going to be Charles Dykes of Botany AI.
Are we sharing screen?
Yep, looks good.
Looks good. There we are. Thanks so much, Mark. I love what you guys are doing there. It's amazing work. So my name is Charles Dykes. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Botany AI. It's really no secret to anyone here that the food industry is probably in its most prominent transformation in the past 100 years. Obviously spurred on by disruptions from COVID-19. It's really only having an effect of accelerating the trend, particularly in the area of alternative protein and the push to remove animals from the food supply chain. The vast majority of media attention really in this area has really been focused on plant-based meat. I think probably almost all of us have heard of Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods at this point, which has really gotten a lot of press. Certainly they've had an amazing impact on the sector itself. Cultivated meat is sort of the other end of that spectrum. I think everybody's probably heard of lab-based meat. It's kind of got a bit of an ick factor to it. Cultivated is probably a better term. And really, I think more appropriately in that area is cell-based, which really is a growing meat from stem cells harvested from animals themselves. So there's a third, probably lesser known sector, which is really largely untapped, but really is kind of the rising star of the alternative protein scene, and it's called microbial fermentation. The really cool thing about microbial fermentation, or at least fermentation, we've all heard of it. So this is a concept where we're using microscopic organisms as tiny protein factories to actually produce proteins identical to those made by animals or plants for that matter. So it's the same process that we've used to produce many things that we all love, like beer, wine, cheese. Microbial fermentation can be broken down sort of into three different sectors, and I'll kind of take you through here. And that's sort of traditional fermentation, which spans back for hundreds of years. I think we're all familiar with it. This is the area where you're actually taking microorganisms as processors of raw materials. For example, tempeh, and that's metabolizing and transforming plant-derived ingredients, right, to enhance products with unique flavor, or nutritional profiles or modified textures, things along these lines. So you notice that this is on a spectrum on the x-axis at the bottom of active processing agents. So we're using agents in this regard to really go to work on existing proteins or other materials. The one to the left, actually using more inert ingredients, is producing biomass fermentation. So this is where we're actually using fermentation or bioreactors to produce large amounts of proteins, large quantities of proteins in sort of scalable, efficient manner for use as a primary ingredient. So this would make up the mass of a product. I think probably the best example we can think of is mycoprotein. There's a group called MEAT, which is reproducing mycelium to create whole muscle type of protein. This is a really interesting use case for microbial fermentation. In this particular case, you're using it in such a way to produce the sort of mass, right, or the more commodity protein itself, which is a really fascinating use case. So you kind of go up that y-axis where you're talking about more purified ingredients. You have the sort of larger segment, which is probably one of the fastest growing, and that's precision fermentation, right? And this is where you're using host cells as factories for sort of producing specific functional ingredients that can enhance and enable end products, predominantly made of plant proteins. So this is a little bit different than the prior two, in that what you're looking to do here is to use a microbe, for example, yeast, to produce a protein and produce a protein in a way that you're going to actually end up extracting it or purifying it from the host itself. And so I think interesting examples, amino acids, producing vitamins or enzymes. So it's something that's been around for a number of years, and we've been using it for quite a long time. I think if anyone's familiar with rennet, rennet used to be harvested from the stomach lining of baby calves. Rennet is actually the enzyme that's used to produce cheese. That's what makes it curdle. And we've been using precision fermentation in that regard for many years to reproduce this without actually having to harvest from an animal. So probably the newer companies in this space that you may have heard of that are really gaining traction and exploding in growth is Geltor, for example, which is producing collagen. There's a group called Clara Foods, which is actually producing the proteins that you find in eggs, believe it or not. And I think the best example in terms of comparative analogy for what we're doing is Perfect Day. Perfect Day is producing dairy proteins without the cow. And so literally using the host enzymes to be the host to be able to recreate proteins themselves. So where Perfect Day is actually focused on the proteins that you find in dairy, we're focused on the proteins that you find in the native protein molecules that you find in red meat. And specifically, the naturally occurring amino acids that produce the rich umami taste that you get when you eat beef. So literally, it's a small peptide. It's 8 amino acids. And it's what's responsible for delivering that beautiful taste that you get, that rich umami taste that you get when you're eating steak or any other kind of a beef product. What's interesting about it is it was originally isolated from beef stock. And what's really cool about this, if you were to take our peptide, combine it with fat, add it to water, lo and behold, you have vegan beef stock, it was kind of an astonishing concept. So the question is, why exactly would you do this? So here's an interesting point fact. So 30% of animals that are processed through animal agriculture are broken down into constituent parts for use across the food industry, sort of like in ways that most of us probably don't even understand, but many dozens and dozens of applications. And so the opportunity here is to skip the cow altogether. And rather than producing or breaking down from the cow, let's just produce these directly. And so the outcome there is we can produce clean, consistent products, right? That sort of remove a lot of the problems that you get from animal agriculture. So it's a pretty straightforward value proposition to create a safer, more consistent product. You know, that's we can produce it with better quality control, and ultimately at scale with price stability. And again, with, I think, the ultimately vastly increased sustainability. So how are we doing this? So on the far left-hand side, you're going to see what looks like a DNA strain, and that's precisely what it is. You know, where cultivated meat is actually taking a stem cell and harvesting it from the animal and looking to reproduce meat or grow meat from that. We're actually starting with the gene sequence. So it's never met the cow. It has nothing to do with the cow, but we're taking this gene sequence and we're introducing it to a single cell organism. And in our case, we're using yeast. Yeast has been around for quite a long time. Everyone's familiar with it in this regard. It's been used safely in the food industry for quite a while. You take the yeast that's been with DNA that's been inserted into it, and you put it into with feedstock, which typically is like sugar, for example, into a bioreactor, also known as a fermentation tank, right? And lo and behold, practically overnight, these tiny microbes begin to produce the protein itself and begin to produce it identically to what's in the animal, but just doing it without the cow. So the opportunity here is to apply these sort of across the food industry, whether you're talking about plant-based food. In our case, we talked about the stock, so you can literally reproduce soup and create just all kinds of beef flavored or beef products that are completely vegan and safe and clean to eat. Plant-based steak, and we're starting to do a lot of huge innovation in the area of meat production, fish, sushi, beef jerky. All of these things produce or require animal products, and we can literally be a drop-in replacement for those. So our expertise at Botany is really focused more on the precision fermentation, and we partner with the industry for the areas of food science and production. So our proteins really are like building blocks if you think about it. So they create that highly desired flavor of beef without the cow. The peptides deliver clean label, rich umami taste from naturally occurring amino acids. It's an amazing technology that really allows us to do some interesting things and to create and look at our technology as sort of a building block. So the peptides really are building blocks, foundational building blocks that allow us to leverage flavor technology and to combine these with other more complex proteins such as collagens or even fats like lipids to create combinations. And this is exactly where we would be applying artificial intelligence to be able to create higher order pairs or combinations and to be able to customize flavors for various parts of the food industry. None of this magic happens without an amazing team behind me. So I wanted to end by talking through our team a little bit. So on the far right-hand side, you've got Austin Cole, who's a PhD protein engineer, molecular biologist. He's an expert in protein engineering. Chris Gusky, who's our chief technology officer, biochemical engineer with 30 years of biotech in the food industry, has worked for Tate & Lyle for 15 years. Iga Hallberg, who is my co-conspirator and co-founder, 20 years in business development, ag tech, clean tech, and bringing new materials to the market. So my background is actually in artificial intelligence, sort of in really interesting applications across. So I do not come from the food industry, but excited to apply AI in this area. Picture there just proves that I once was able to grow hair. So if anybody would love to learn more about this industry itself, the Good Food Institute is probably the best place to do it. I can't think of a better resource for you guys to look at from a science perspective. Cultivated meat, plant-based meat, fermentation, sort of it runs the gambit. GFI.org is an amazing resource for both the industry as well as folks just looking to learn more about it. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Rick Whitted for U.S. Hunger Now.
Thanks, Charles. I appreciate the introduction, and clearly I'm the not smart guy on the call. So just fascinating work that both Charles and Mark are doing. So I'm Rick Whitted, CEO of a nonprofit called US Hunger, formerly for a decade known as Feeding Children Everywhere. I'm going to do more show and tell just from the perspective of time and not wanting to be the guy that made everyone stay late at the party. So I will tell you, I became the CEO in the early part of last year, right at the start of the pandemic. And we woke up by the end of February and 90% of our revenue were gone. And we had been known for a decade in bringing in groups and packing a lot of food and sending that all over the country and as well as international. But when you can't bring groups of people, we had to figure out quickly, how do you use your distribution mechanism? We, in those events, we were moving food strategically across the country. And how do we begin to get food directly to the front door of those who need it the most? And that was a challenge for us. And I will tell you in short, that is something we could not have done without the use of technology. It started as a simple question: how can I get this darn report quicker than that? I need it quicker than 4 days. And so we began to build a SaaS-capable enterprise system that brings all of our systems together to talk to each other. Clearly, I just wanted business insight. However, what we found is that when your business is feeding people, you begin to learn a lot about feeding people. And so just a couple slides I will share with you right before I walk into just showing you our platform. So this is a screen. It's the most recent data from the USDA on food insecurity. I call this food insecurity now and then. If you look to the left, that was in 2000, our food insecurity in this country was about 10.5%. If you looked today, 2019, the most recent data in the census, we won't talk about 2020, we'll talk about that in a second. What you will see is it's roughly the same. Now, I want you to think about two things. As a country, we spend over 100 billion with a B a year in food nutrition and assistance. And there's tons of food that moves all over the country. And so when you draw that line between then and now, 2 decades later, you will notice we really haven't substantively dropped food insecurity. And you go, well, wait a minute. If you look over the last 8-9 years, it looks like it's gone down. Well, that actually was the 2008 financial crisis. And if you fast forward and look at where we will be in 2020, estimates are that we're seeing 2, 3, some I've heard 6x in terms of the spike in food insecurity. The one thing I want you to take notice of, just from 2008's financial crisis, how long it actually took just to get back to, not improve, but get back to 2000 levels. And so my organization is about figuring out how can we solve this problem. And for years, we were very excited to say we provided 150 million meals in 53 countries, 800 hours of 800,000 volunteers. And there's one question we never asked: who are we feeding? No, really, who is it that we're feeding? And why are they hungry in the first place? And when you wake up and 90% of your revenue is gone, you've got to figure out very quickly, how do I make the most impact with the least? And that was our attempt. And so that took us down the path of technology. And so I'm gonna switch screens and just share live our platform. And so what you're looking at is enterprise system that we built. Behind this are literally about 7 or 8 disparate systems that did not talk to each other, did not like each other, did not date each other, did not know each other. To get one report from at least 5 of them took a week, and that was the world we came into. This changed all of that. It melded our platforms together, forced them to talk and cooperate, and allowed us to mine data and information in a way that was very pertinent and helpful and insightful in terms of how we run our business. Again, our business is feeding people. So I'm just going to take you to some of the fun stuff. This is our analytics. So in 2020, we moved nearly 70,000 boxes of food directly to the front door of low-income families and individuals. 89% of every person we sent a box of food to lives in a food desert. So they do not have direct or close access to fresh produce. There may be a Dollar General, there may be a fast food restaurant, but no leafy greens, no quick access, which is a challenge when you are a single parent, 3 children in tow. You've got to get on the bus, make your way to a food bank and figure out how you're going to get that box back home. Our organization is about really solving that problem and creating access and equity to food to those who need it the most. What technology allowed us to do was to take an extremely impactful moment in a person's life, i.e., will I be able to eat tomorrow? Will I be able to feed my children tomorrow? And it allowed us through this virtual platform to ask questions we hadn't thought of before. So the first part of this was beginning to track exactly where we were feeding. And so we use the cluster model. I'm just going to drill in here into the Texas area. We use this model because if we put every dot, it would look like a severe case of road rash. And so as we drill in, you can see, I'll go right into Austin, we're able now to get right down to the street level of who we're feeding and where we're feeding. I'm gonna back out for a second and just show you a couple layers that we have added in this model. So I'm just going to jump to first opportunity zones. Many of our sponsors and partners are, this is an important slice of neighborhoods for them. They do a lot of development. We work with a lot of financial institutions, and they're already doing a lot of investing into these areas. So the concept of really being global and holistic in their approach, and not just looking at one piece of how do I revitalize this neighborhood and these families in it, but the whole piece. This is an important filter for them. Probably the most important for us are food deserts. And so you will see here, as I turn that on, it kind of lit up pink in the Austin area. I don't know this area well. I'm a Florida guy. But as you can see, the more we drill down, we start seeing where we're feeding and who it is that we're feeding.
Hey, Rick.
Yes.
Hey, Rick. This is Joy. I'll give you a little bit of just an overlay here for some folks here. So what Rick has highlighted here and why I really like his work is he's really highlighting, his pink areas highlight what we already know in Austin, which is the Eastern Crescent, the southeast quadrants of our city, and some of the north central parts of our city. And we could talk about that a little later when we close.
So you'll see, though I don't know this area, our platform really does. And so to Joy's point, the darker the pink or the red, the higher food or poverty is. So if you look in this area here, this census tract is showing about 67% poverty rate, median income's about 33,000, population of 5,000, and it gives a breakout of children in that census tract. We can do this literally nationwide across the entire continental US. And it allows us to really start understanding and asking different questions. What are the root causes behind why they're hungry? And I'll show you one other filter here. We try to be very proactive with our clients, our donors, our sponsors who socially invest into our organization. So you'll see here, these are just a number of the partners and sponsors that we work with. And we are able to literally drill in on any one of these partners and wherever they have fed across the country or sponsored boxes of food, and or we also provide a 10 to 12 pound box of fresh produce that we partner with a farm that have figured out how to deliver that fresh and cold and guarantee it for 3 days. So it literally is a farm to table box of 10 to 12 pounds of produce that arrives to the front door of a low to income area family who gets leafy fresh greens that are not wilted. They also get a variety of fruit and vegetables. So more than just the hardy stuff you're used to seeing in a box that would survive a nuclear blast, your potatoes, your carrots, your apples, and those are great things, but we do understand the importance and the need, particularly when I show you a couple other pieces of data for leafy greens. So I think one of the things that shocked us most, and I'll kind of jump right into how we mine this information. So when you take leafy, or when you take technology, you take a food distribution system, and our intake is just a virtual application that folks would go directly to our website, and if they need assistance, they would apply. There's two key pillars to our program: discretion and dignity. So we have formulated a client experience department. We do NPS scoring. I read every verbatim every month. What we have learned is if a person does not feel self-worth and value, it's hard to really help them. And so every touch, every experience that my team has with any family that we work with, it starts with them understanding through that touch that you are extremely important and that you are of value. And so our box does not look like food help. It looks like something that would show up at Amazon. And there are many families. We have more than 60,000 applicants in our system. We have not marketed one time to those applicants. And where I showed you the green dots, if I had clicked another button for time, I won't, you would have saw an equal amount of red dots that show applicants that are still unfunded in our area. What you're seeing here is a number of reports. I will not go into all of these. I'll just show you a couple. I think one of the most astonishing things to us was to realize that food directly is a health issue. And so we asked our clients when they would apply, tell us what's going on. We give them a space for literally sharing their verbatim story. We intend to roadmap our future tech build out for us is to use AI and machine learning to really drill into those stories and start identifying a variety of triggered social determinants of health that really get behind the root cause of why are they hungry in the first place. And so just some of the data here that you will see, for example, what I just pulled up was how many people typically in our area that apply have diabetes. And so you start to see in this cluster map, roughly 23, 24% of individuals in a state that apply are going to also, on top of saying, I'm hungry, please help, are going to be saying, I'm also managing diabetes. And so this is just a sample of kind of the reporting that we have access to. I'll show you one other. For example, COVID. This is interesting. We weren't sure, but we wanted to know, so how is COVID really affecting and or impacting our applicants who are applying for food? Well, when we dug in, what we thought we would see, and this is just 2020 data, we thought we would see folks say jobs, financial hardship, and there were about 30% of those who said, you know, in their story that COVID was a part of the reason I'm applying. But what we found was of almost 19,000, nearly 12,000 said it was a health-related condition. And what we've seen in our data is more than 3 of 5 families that apply for food are also managing, on average, 2 chronic illnesses in their home. And so that really stopped us in our tracks. And that's what led us to really begin to seek out fresh produce, because we saw really quickly, this is the intersection of health and hunger, and that food is in that hunger is not just a food issue, but a health issue. And so what you see is this data has allowed us to ask different questions and really get behind the root causes. I'm going to show you one other and then I'll wrap up. This is the fun part for us. And what I'm just going to show you is a taste of what we can do in our capability. So if I typed in housing, eviction, rent, mortgage, lease, homelessness, what I'm really looking for is the social determinant of housing insecurity to see if there is links to that in our population of folks who have applied for food. And I'll just do one of these. I could do this for child abuse. I could do this for health screening. I could do it for any of the determinants of health. And I'm sorry, what I should have did was match any, and I did match all. And so what you'll see roughly is every story, I've masked these so you can't see the details of the individual applicants for HIPAA reasons, amongst others. But what you will see is a list of stories, and we read these and they're gut-wrenching. But what our system just pulled up was a list of stories with verbatims. We call these hunger stories of almost 2,800 applicants whose stories show signs of both hunger and housing insecurity. As you will see, many of these also show a list of chronic illness. This, for example, is diabetes and hypertension. This one is chronic lung disease. So with that, I will turn it back over for the sake of time. Be more than happy to talk more. We will include in the chat how to get a hold of us if you're interested or want to know more. It's ushunger.org, or you can simply send an email to rick@ushunger.org. Joy, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick, Charles, and Mark. I hope you guys who are joining us today, this is why I changed my career. This is important work. This is amazing work. It is still technical work, but it's work that is focused on changing everything about how humans consume, eat, acquire food, so that there is better living, better lives. And I can't think of a higher use of our skills as professionals and technologists and owners and leaders than to do this work. So I thank all three of these gentlemen for being with us tonight. So I'm going to show you guys one slide because I was going to be good. And so I'm going to share. Let's see. One slide just to add on to Rick's, specific to Travis County. And can you guys see that? Yep. Hopefully you just see that one slide. I won't go into a whole bunch of detail. So just a little bit about Travis County. So specific to Travis County, one of the wealthiest counties in the United States. These are our specific numbers. These were actually shown to the Travis County commissioners in a meeting that I and several others were at. Edwin Marty showed these. He is the food policy manager for the city of Austin in the Office of Sustainability around our own food insecurity. And I think you guys have a ton of questions, and someone did ask a question. We'll get to the definition of food insecurity in the Q&A. But as you can see, our own numbers, and to Rick's point about 2020, there's our own numbers substantiating that around 2020, and see how their numbers increasing. Where we had spent a lot of time in Travis County trying to get our numbers down, we know that 25% of all children in Travis County are experiencing, 24% of children in Travis County are experiencing what we call food insecurity. And it is about now 18 to 20% of adults. And these numbers have risen in the last year, and they expect to rise again. This is the challenge that faces us here in Travis County. You see the $87 million shortfall in meeting unmet food needs, 53% increase in child food insecurity from 2018 to 2020. and 41% of food insecure people in Travis County that do not qualify for any federal assistance, WIC, SNAP, or school meal program. So we're still talking about a lot of people who don't have children who are in the school system or school age. Not that parents are able to access that, but definitely their kids. Kids are not, don't give them any access to a universe of food. And they're outside of WIC and they're outside of SNAP. So we're talking about a lot of people who work who don't have access to programs. And that became a huge issue last year under COVID because we saw a lot of new people. And that was specifically what our program at the Cook's Nook in combination with Travis County was meant to address. All the new people who were not in any program, who did not know the food bank, who were now suddenly food insecure. We were actually charged with finding new populations of people who will be shocked at and did not understand their own new food insecurity. And those are the 3,000 meals a day that we're now providing out across Travis County. So this is real, and it's in our county, what Rick has talked about. And so the solutions that that Mark and Charles talked about, and that a lot of entrepreneurial companies and businesses are bringing to market, my hope is that they become answers, not just to bring the products to market for general population, but that they become affordable means of addressing insecurity in food access and food equity. If I go back to what we talked about at the beginning, we know that those are going to be solved through innovation and new methods, not by methods that have already existed. And we know those audiences through the work like folks that U.S. Hunger and guys like Rick are doing on the ground in the neighborhoods, because that's the only way we know to find and reach people at this point. It is not something we get to do behind a desk. We're having to go out and find populations and reach people because they may or may not have access, and chances are they don't have access. So with that, I think we're there. I think that's it on the presentation front. Technically, I know there's a ton of questions in the Q&A and everything. What do you guys think?
So we're going to get to Q&A at about 7:30.
Okay.
We have a few more slides for the presentation part of the meeting, but I just want to say thank you all so much. And that flow and that integration and that synergy between what you're all doing. I mean, it's like Rick identifies who needs food. Mark and Charles have new ways of making better, healthier, both vegetables and proteins. And then Joy makes sure it gets to them. I mean, that is a wonderful synergy between the four of you. So I hope that we see these numbers coming down over the next few years. And I hope, all of us technologists, we sometimes take this for granted, but I love the way you talked about how AI and IoT and data analytics and other things were playing huge roles in this. So thank you all for sharing that. All right, we have lots more to hear from you, but we're going to share our final slides right now so people know what's coming up. Great event tonight. Will be impossible to top it, but we will try to match it. Again, April is AI month. We have What is AI on April 6th with two of my good friends presenting at that. April 13th about how AI is changing things. April 20th about AI fairness and transparency from the UT Systems Good project. And on April 28th, we're going to bring back the AI and Whiskey Chat event because that was so popular last time. And in fact, we've been asked about blockchain and especially Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. We were thinking about maybe having a Bitcoin and bourbon chat later this month. If you'd be interested in attending an online Bitcoin and bourbon chat later this month, let us know in the chat window now. Joy, I hear you. You're a single malt drinker, so I guess you probably won't come to that one. But you could just pour the single malt into a glass and pretend like it's bourbon for that. So
Joy's coming for Bitcoin and bourbon, though. Either way, yeah.
That's right. We have events in May. 2 events in May. Smart Cities on May 4th and Immersive Experiences from Austin's own Amber Allen on May 18th. We will cover blockchain and distributed ledger technologies on June 2nd, and then we'll have our formal presentation event on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies on June 16th. We got a lot more coming up. Our friends from CVEX are going to talk about money and finance in the second half of the year. We'll have presentations on robotics. Austin Energy will help us put together a great presentation on energy. We'll talk about autonomous vehicles and drones and much, much more. And we'll also introduce more new event types. The tech and whiskey chats have been fun, but we're going to do some small group discussions, probably a tech movie night with Q&A with experts debating what was realistic and what wasn't about the tech in the movie, some tech book discussions, and more.
Please join our Austin Forum Slack workspace, austinforum.org/Slack. Click join the channel, click enter your email address, check your email for a confirmation, and then enter your name and click create account, and voila, you are in. We stay engaged after these events too, and that's a great way to stay connected throughout the month and in between events. Please join us.
And I want to quickly thank our annual partners again. As Jessica mentioned, we have a number of really passionate Austin local companies in this group. We also have some national and global technology giants in this group. We have the Energy Utility of Austin, the Austin Technology Council, South by Southwest itself. We've got all these great companies, and it's their collective commitment and support of the Austin Forum that makes all this possible.
So put it in the chat, and then also still stick around for Q&A. But what was the best thing that you learned tonight? I already seen in the chat, I saw, what other comments have I seen? I saw some really great ones that I wanted to call out, but what was the best thing? Oh, Ryan said that this was a great presentation all around, maybe his favorite mix of presentations of any Austin Tech Forum ever. So that's pretty positive.
Obviously, Ryan did not see me in January, so, but no, I'm kidding. This was better.
It was a mix of it. There was only two. There was two J's. Jay.
That's right. Me and Jay.
We need a mix. So fermentation, food deserts, beef proteins without cows, aeroponic gardening. Great presentations overall. Astounding how many in Austin are in the hunger position. Absolutely, Gwen. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So really great things. Please keep sharing. Stick around. This is when Jay gets his steps in by going back to his whiskey bar. We're walking to Mortar, guys. It's an app. We can talk to you about it later. But to grab a drink. Oh, Jay can say this part.
The grab a drink?
Yeah.
Oh, we'll resume in about 2 to 3 minutes. So if you need to take a break, do that now, and then we'll go to the Q&A. We have a lot of questions. So we're going to ask the speakers to start looking over them now so that we can roll through them and get pretty quick answers.
You don't need to write the answers out, because some of them I saw some of the answers like being written, but I might still ask them. And then I will be picking my favorite, the best question. But speakers, so feel free to get a drink. Everybody stick around. Make sure if you put in a Q&A to stick around, because that's the only way to win. This is fantastic. This is really interesting. I'm assuming Joy went to go get her single malt. That's my story right now, what Joy's doing.
I chose a single malt tonight too, in honor of Joy.
We didn't hear you, Joy.
Joy, you're on mute.
I would say, I was sitting here reading questions, but now that you mentioned it, I'll be right back.
Go get it. It's good. It's the end of the night. Rick, this is informal, but some of these are directed just to specific people. Do you partner with Aunt Bertha? Julie Wicker wanted to know.
We do tend to get applicant interest coming from Aunt Bertha. That's the site that ranks folks for help when they're looking for resources. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I hear the name and not. My client experience department works quite a bit with folks coming from that direction. That's the only reason I even know. Yeah, we get that a lot.
Got it. Wonderful. Wow.
Charles, I have to say, when you started talking about the fermentation process to create these proteins from these plant things, I wondered, is he going to talk about how to make a steak and bourbon all in one? I thought maybe you were going to get there.
That's next.
Name it the J, please.
All right. Have we given everybody enough time? Should we start the Q&A?
Joy
I
hasn't
say
come
let's
back.
do it.
Okay, Joyce, we told Joy that she should go get her single malt.
That's right. Well, thanks everybody for staying with us tonight. And again, thanks to the presenters. That was fantastic. It was inspiring. The presentations fit together so well. And you all give me hope that we'll be able to address some of these food equity issues. So thanks for all the great work you do. Jessica will start picking questions now.
Absolutely. I'm going to go backwards and forwards in this, but I know that Rick, I saw you started to answer this, and Joy, I saw you mentioning it, but at the end we talked about, these technologies help support people who don't have access to food and food insecurity. Can we just get a high level definition of what food insecurity means from Rick or Joy or?
Yeah, I mean, I can take it. It's just someone who doesn't have consistent access to food for a healthy, sustainable living.
Yeah, the USDA gives a great series of definitions, and there are a series of questions that are asked. Just an example, was this statement often, sometimes, never true for you in the last 12 months? We were worried whether or not our food would run out before we had the money to buy more food. Households that reported 3 or more conditions that indicated food security, they unable to acquire adequate food for 1 or more household members. Someone was denied food or ate less food because of they didn't have it, or it was given to someone else. They were worried where the food would run out. The food they bought didn't last, and they didn't get more, or they couldn't afford to eat balanced meals. So there's a whole series of qualitative and quantitative questions that define food insecurity. It's actually pretty comprehensive to be able to distinguish. And then there's also questions that indicate severity as well.
Levels.
And levels, yeah. And
Yeah,
I'm happy to give you that. I'm happy to give you the link. It's actually very fascinating on how they define and slice food insecurity.
And Jessica, we include a number of those questions in our applicant survey as well.
Got it. Great. Thank
Adults
you.
ate less than they felt they should. They cut out meals in a certain period and time frame.
Great. Thank you. So this is from earlier in the conversation too, going back to, I think we go to Mark and Charles, but what are the byproducts of both of your processes? Are there any byproducts? Okay.
Yeah, I'll go first.
Charles, please go ahead.
Yeah, so what we're producing are highly purified products, and so we start out using yeast as our host organism, which is perfectly fine to be used in a wholesale format. In other words, it could be the product itself, and it wouldn't require necessarily for us to purify. But in our case, we are purifying, and so ultimately what we're producing is a peptide that's a low inclusion rate kind of a product. So in other words, it doesn't make up the biomass of a product, but instead it's sort of it adds outsized impact to a product. And so if you're trying to reproduce, plant-based meat, for example, that's just one example where we could apply our products. It could be applied in that regard, but done in a clean label way because it's a naturally occurring amino acid. So if we can just reproduce literally what nature has already created, but do it in a process more sustainable, that's our goal.
Yeah, I was going to say a key byproduct actually is a healthier community. So we're going to frame it a little bit differently. The work we're doing, I mentioned not only in the schools, but also this municipal program. I just want to kind of build on it a little bit further because we're building the farms and putting them in the communities, but they're going to be operated by the community, and the product that's grown will be given to the community for free. So that is really when we talk about, again, how do we address equity and access is a big component there. Before even going further, I just want to highlight a couple of things too. I mean, and Rick shared the statistics, and then Joy did too, specifically for Travis County. And Joy mentioned in my bio, my inspiration for a lot of the work I'm doing started with when I was on the marketing advisory board for the Food Bank for New York City. And there, the basic premise, and it's 2 decades now, the exact same numbers in terms of, 1 out of 4 people facing issues in terms of access to food. And for kids, it's even, that's that's even higher now with COVID without being in school. So it's, how can we do better? And we have to do better. I mean, this is, as a society, and then as a, trying to think about business as a force for good, that's how we're trying to embrace the certified B Corporation from that standpoint. But to go back a little bit more on the little question, Jessica, in terms of byproduct, we use zero pesticides. We use just a fraction of the fertilizer. So in terms of that environmental footprint, in terms of that aspect, we're also able to do things that you can't do in the field. We do second harvest that normally would be left out in the field. We can actually harvest the stems, and there's also quite a bit of leaf biomass. And we actually have customers who buy that and are able to enjoy it. And so, we're constantly thinking about the circular economy, how do you eliminate waste, how do you make it productive? And our thesis is the ultimate definition of the circular economy is a healthy community, people themselves, in terms of, again, how do we have increased productivity?
That's great. That actually, so that brings, I'm going to ask one more question to you two, and then there's some questions for Rick and Joy. But this is from our own John Lockman, who's part of the Austin Forum team. Can anyone touch on the impact on migrant workers and current farmers when you're moving to a warehouse farm or growing meats through fermentation? Because it really will shift the industry and the economy by making it more efficient. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to it, and there's also, it shifts the economy.
No question. I mean, no question it's going to shift the economy. I think ultimately the sustainability in the food supply is one of the most critical problems that we have to solve, along with climate change. It's one of the biggest contributors to climate change. And so particularly animal agriculture itself. So if we can produce the ingredients that we need in ways that are more sustainable over time, in my opinion, it's a no-brainer to do. Will it affect economies? No question.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit of a perspective. Aero Farms, we set it out up in Ithaca, upstate New York, in the Finger Lakes area. Our chief science officer was a professor at Cornell University, one of the top ag programs. But when we thought about relocating, and one of the things that we looked very closely at in terms of our global headquarters is that we looked at areas that had historically very high unemployment rates. And Newark, New Jersey was a great partner in terms of thinking about what we could do from a job creation. And so I had highlighted that manufacturing jobs have disappeared. And so we're creating a new economy, new types of jobs with respect to employment, giving opportunities that people never ever imagined working in farming in Newark, New Jersey, right? And so it's creating a new path for a broader workforce. And what we're finding as well, even working with traditional land-grant universities, it's about, again, how do we introduce this STEM? So this whole community and this whole lens in terms of what Jay had asked us to talk about, which is we can, you're not writing an app, you're writing a program that's going to have an impact on people. Food is tangible, brings people together. And so this idea that we can apply all the science, technology, engineering, math now to really solve, much more, we'll just call it tangible, issues that we're facing, is bringing a different type of workforce back into agriculture as well. So it's exciting for us to see what's ahead of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jessica, as a follow-on to that, since they talked about resources, can we ask, there's a question from Eric Swartz. He asked it for Mark, but I'd like to hear it from both Mark and Charles. Can you speak to the energy use relative to other techniques? So how much energy are you saving?
I think it's a difficult comparison because to produce a lot of the products that we use from animal derived, agriculture, you have to go all the way back to the farming that requires to produce the feed and the crops to feed those animals themselves, right? Before you could ever get to producing the animal itself, and all the way down to the area what we would be focused on, which is actually reproducing the constituent parts of that animal once it's been processed. And so it's a difficult question, honestly, to answer in terms of a comparative analysis. But there's no question in my mind that, we don't have much of a choice in going forward. We change, we evolve, or we don't feed the world's population.
But you would, you're saying it's difficult to quantify. It's certainly less, but quantifying how much less is difficult because quantifying how much energy it takes to produce livestock all the way to maturity is difficult.
Here's an interesting comparative that I do know. So it takes about 8 to 10 calories to feed the cow to turn that into a single calorie protein ingredient that we can use in the industry. And so it's just not a very efficient process by nature.
I mean, I will add that the externalities are really tough when you try to make apples to apples comparisons. And for vertical farming, there's no question, there's kind of a spotlight, literally, when people look at the farming and they can see the lighting, right? And they think about, oh my gosh, what's involved with that? But the fact is, there's something called Heitz's law in terms of more efficient type of LEDs. And we actually design our own luminaire that's 59% more efficient than what's out in the market. So, and we deliver the right type of spectrum, but we think it's probably more meaningful to frame it a little bit differently in that when you compare it to field farming and the challenges, and you think about a food system approach. Just to put it in perspective, I think it's pretty well understood when people talk about food waste, 40% of food is being thrown out at the back end. But when you take it for specific crops like leafy greens, and you take it back through the whole value chain, the consumer, the retailer, to the distribution, to the processor, to the farm, it's over 70% is lost. And so think about all the embedded energy inputs that go into that. And then for leafy greens, and there's a reason, why, and people don't have necessarily an association of like where their food is grown. 93% of leafy greens are grown either in Salinas, that's why it's known as the salad bowl, or in terms of Yuma, Arizona, depending on time of the year. But those are really challenging in terms of, they're depleting the aquifer at greater rates than replenishment. They're having to install bigger pumps that are going more energy intensive. So there's a lot of complexity when you think about it. You think about like the energy bill in California, 20% of the energy bill is moving water around. Again, who pays for that ultimately? The consumer is paying for it in taxes, but not necessarily in direct pricing. And so how do you factor that into the cost equation, into the environmental equation? There's a lot to be able to consider in that equation.
Yeah, I think both of you have emphasized the difficulty with quantifying the comparison, but that the numbers are much, much, much lower because in the traditional methods, it's just hard to add up all the energy costs.
I think that based on what you said too, Sarah Mitchell had a good question, which was, and this, I think Joy might be able to speak to this and whoever else, is anybody focused on saving the zucchinis from being destroyed, the milk spilled, the meat spoiling when there are no distribution channels to take to the supermarkets? Joy's like, no. You don't know.
Joy,
you're on mute. You're on mute. Whoop.
My apologies. I mean, honestly, the answer is not really. I mean, it costs to do that. And so you still have to have refrigeration, you still have to have storage, you still have to have transport. And the challenge with that last year was that none of those things were happening and no one was paying for those things to happen. So, you can't sort of save milk when there's no place to save it, right? There's no economics to save milk. So it is easier to open the chutes and let the milk go to the ground. I mean, honestly, I'll give you a quick example. At the beginning of COVID, we got a random phone call because people were just trying to get rid of product. They'd take pennies on the dollar. It didn't matter, right? Because they desperately wanted to make anything off of it because of the very thing that you just brought up. We got a phone call from the East Coast from a pork distributor who just said, we've got an entire 18-wheeler full of pork products, happy to send them to you. You just need to pay for the truck to get back. And you can have everything in it. Well, none of us could take it. Not one organization, not one group. There's no place to put that. There's no place to store that. No one has any place. No one can pay for that truck to get back. No one has a place for an entire 18-wheeler packages. There's no cold storage in Austin, period, actually, anyway. So if there's no economics to do that and no one can afford to do that, it won't happen and it's going to get wasted. I mean, that's pretty much the simple answer to that. Yeah.
Thank you. Marissa had a question for you, Rick, in addition to an acknowledgement of the amazing work that you're doing. How is U.S. Hunger packaging this technology and making it available to other organizations like local food banks?
So it's an interesting question, particularly this week, as we have been on the phone with a couple of food banks around the country. And so In many ways, I see this as a closing the loop in terms of kind of the feeding system out there. You've just got a number of people, not just COVID, but historically, that the discretion piece is really important for them. Standing in that line is a sign of, you know, I've been beaten. And it's hard to ask help. I mean, personally, having experienced, you know, that type of need in my life, I struggled with just asking my dad for help than to ask strangers. And so the case in point is that of the 60,000 plus applicants that have made their way to our food bank, we've done no marketing. We don't advertise. When they see a box show up, they tend to ask about that and discreetly make their way to our site and request food as well. So in many ways, and my short answer to that is, you know, we love partnering with the other amazing feeding organizations out there to really try to close this loop and help all that we can. We're just structured in a way where we don't have a lot of that intensive infrastructure, and to try to get an organization like that to, you know, to invest, it would be a lot to really try to reroute how that infrastructure works today, in getting food delivered directly to the front door of homes across the country. We built our model in that way. So in many ways, it's complement. And where we can meet and where we're talking with a couple of key food banks around the country now is in our technology. We do have that ability to know who and where we're helping. And so I think it's at the place of technology where we're going to find ourselves partnering quite a bit with the traditional food banks out there and the good work they do.
Thank you. I see, sorry, I'm watching so many good questions that I'm like trying to watch them and make sure I'm following all of them too. Jay, are there any questions that I haven't asked that you want to ask, or I should message you you're the ones I'm
I like the one from Sanjana Pai. What are some struggles for the adoption of vertical farms versus traditional agriculture? I mean, I sort of know this one a little bit because Dell Technologies helped work with Aero Farms, but it all sounds great. Mark, are there any struggles you're facing?
Yeah, we like to say we're the longest overnight success, yeah. So there is, without question, there's some other questions alluding to this. I mean, there is a capital intensity, you know, to these farms, and it's been a matter of proving out, you know, how these work together. And you know, we've been at this for 15 years. We'll be the first to tell you that this is incredibly complex. You know, we're taking biology at the end of the day and trying to normalize it and create a right environment. And we think our approach in terms of designing our own systems allows us, though, a very different lens and thesis on how we manage that CapEx and OpEx. And so, you know, we've been demonstrating our commercial key KPIs, and we have been very fortunate to have raised, you know, $200 million in financing that has allowed us to be able to think about how we can have, you know, we're working on a Model 5 generation, you know, of the next farm. And so it's about continuously improving on those metrics. You know, just in the last year, we improved our yield by 29%. You know, I mean, these are game changing in terms of your business, you know, models, you know, when you think about traditional ag. So it's been a matter of finding, you know, where we can have the biggest impact. There've been some questions on what types of crops, you know, when we talk about growing over 500 different types of varieties of crops, doesn't mean we grow everything. It's where we can add value. And sometimes it's on the germination, sometimes it's on the propagation, sometimes it's on the final end product. It could be on the extract as an ingredient, you know. So there's lots of different ways that we're working with different companies. What we found is that our business model is not only just on the commercial product that we're growing and selling, but we also have a huge R&D arm that we do, where we work with Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, helping to solve their ag supply chain needs. And that was the thesis of when we talk about building up this farm in the UAE of 90,000 square foot, just R&D. It just speaks to how we continue to unlock more value, you know. And, you know, all of a sudden we went from leafy greens, which is over an $8 billion category, to thinking about actually a 1.9 trillion agriculture TAM, total addressable market, that we can actually have an impact in. So for us with vertical farming, it's about where we can think about the right business model, right business impact, and that's what's exciting for us in terms of when we think about what's ahead.
Thank you. There were a lot of questions for you, Mark, specifically, I think also because you went first. So a lot of nerds wanting to know specifics. So we're not going to get to all of them, but I'm hoping that we can convince you, if we put them on Slack, to answer some more of them also, because there's quite a few other questions from that are more specific around AeroFarms and what AeroFarms is doing, which are all great. Becky Taylor, this will be the second to last one. Becky Taylor asked a question about confirming to understand, are these approaches going to augment and increase production and hopefully exceed the outcomes of the 1 billion people saved from starvation? I wonder if Becky's on here and should ask her question, actually. Becky might be able to ask her question better than I'm going to repeat it. I see Becky. I'm going to bring Becky on as my second to last question to ask her question, because she is a really good one. Give me one moment. I'm going to promote Becky Taylor to panelists.
Surprise, Becky.
Surprise, Becky. I really like Becky. That's why I do this. You have to come off mute, though. Off mute, off mute.
I wasn't exactly expecting to be called on, so I'm on my couch.
It's perfect. I figured that, you know, any opportunity to hang out with you, Becky. To ask your question, yeah, because I think you'd be able. I saw you write it twice, so I figured I'd let you just ask it.
Such a huge fan of this forum.
Hi, Becky Taylor.
Hello, Joy. How are you?
Long time no see.
Yes, ma'am. Great to see you here. So the question is, you know, back in the day, a guy named Norman Borlaug figured out how to make a whole lot more food in the same acreage. And that became known as the Green Revolution. That man justly won the Nobel Prize one year for doing all that. Saved 1 billion people from starvation by bumping up production hugely. And I'm wondering, just in terms of trying to understand the scale, scope, and impact of the things that we've heard about tonight, are we in the same ballpark of being able to, through augmentation with what Rick's doing at US Hunger, you know, in the production improvement areas of productivity that AeroFarms is going to happen, and what Joy's doing, and, you know, the make and meat, which is, you know, hugely limited in terms of ultimately how top end of how much it can produce, with what Charles is doing at Botany AI. So you know, we take all that stuff together. Are we in position, if we do things right, to impact positively another 1 billion people?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be yes. The answer doesn't have to be yes. I just want to understand.
So the answer is without question, yes. And I'll tell you why in terms of how we look at that. It's about our direct impact, but we also want to serve as an inspiration for others and help be a catalyst for a broader movement. So when we hear about the work that Charles and Rick are doing, it's about how we can collectively have that broader impact, right? And so the answer is we're going to have an impact on 10 billion people, not just 1 billion, in terms of, I think, where we need to get to and what we'll ultimately be working and focusing on.
So,
Hey, Becky.
go
Joy
Rick.
First.
No, go Rick. Go Rick.
Yeah, I'd say just your question in itself touches on what the only solution will be ultimately, which is holistic and collaborative. And so, you know, I spent nearly 30 years in the corporate world. And so coming over to this, I was really surprised at how disjointed those with really good solutions are. And I think it is coming to the table and talking about how we work together and how we partner, that's going to be the solve ultimately. If we're going to solve, one of the reasons our platform is really less about the work we do and less about insight that's actionable. We really see ourselves as a platform. We can identify solutions, but we're not solvers. Joy actually prepares a lot of this food and gets it out. Mark grows it. Charles sources it. And so it's when we all come together and begin to solve this problem collectively at the root cause, that's when we change things.
I think the the part of it is there. I think this migration of technologists over into this space is huge. And I alluded that to at the beginning, and Rick's bringing it up again. I think you're seeing a migration of folks who understand natively what it means that it takes a whole bunch of pieces to make an actual solution and bring that to the table and get that out the door. I think you're seeing that part. I still think there's a bigger question of what are our values and if we are going to be committed to that. And I think that's questionable. I think that we have diminished food and food workers and the importance of food. And that is a real problem. I'm not quite sure how to overcome that. And we saw that in Travis County during this storm. And that's tough. I think the other part we haven't had a discussion about is the pure logistics and the cost of logistics of distribution. It is expensive to get food out the door to a lot of people in a way that's efficient and effective. And we haven't really had good conversations around that. Yeah. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Becky. We always love to. Becky, for the people who are new here, has also spoken at the Austin Forum as a beloved friend and partner of the Austin Forum. So thank you, Becky, for letting me throw you up on stage, our virtual stage.
Anytime.
So perfect. I'm going to let you go back to your couch without having people see you, putting you back to our attendee. Thank you again. And then I'm going to bring up, it's 8 o'clock, so I apologize. We're going to go 1 minute over because that was such a good question and I wanted to bring her on to talk and dialogue with you guys. But we're going to go to the, my favorite questions of the night. It's sometimes we have people who ask a lot of questions, and we have 2 people by the same name. So I'm wondering if I'm hoping they're the same person because I promoted both of them, which is Ryan Meyer. And then I also realized too that the other speaker attendees did not see the question. So Ryan asks a lot of good questions. Ryan, if you want to come off camera, you're welcome to your favorite one. I think I would.
Ryan's on twice.
Right. I think he might have called in and been on Zoom. Like, I'm not sure, or there's 2 of him, or I'm promoting 2 people and we'll have to duke it out who has actually had the
doubling his chance of the good question.
So hopefully, if he doesn't come on screen, I'm just going to go ahead and ask the questions, a combination of them, so that we can keep going. But Ryan, I hope you can hear this because you got to email me if you're going to win.
Yeah, if you want to win the South by badge, Ryan. Ooh, I see one.
You got to at least message. Okay, he's like,
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, yeah, I started on my phone and then I eventually moved to my computer and then I moved back to my phone. So I'm like a bit all over the place. I know I asked several questions. So was there one in particular that you wanted me to ask?
Well, I think I'll combine them if you're not if you can't see what I can see. What will be the impact of growing greens so efficiently on consumer prices, and how do we think that might affect the supply chain? And then how do we think these new food technologies are going to affect how we relate to land and farming and livestock, and how will that shift how we're going to interact with land? You had quite a few questions, and I thought they were all quite good, Brian. So you get the winning question for all of them. But okay. So anybody who wants to answer those and thoughts and sort of speculations, yeah.
Well, I'm happy to address the one on leafy greens, but please everyone else jump in as well. But listen, there's often a thesis about, how do you sort of have a rush to the bottom, right, in terms of commoditizing. And we have a different lens in terms of, again, we talk about these issues. The field grown product, particularly when I mentioned in terms of California, and there's a lot of questions about worker, right? So we now have a minimum wage, we have overtime, we have benefits that are all being imposed now on farming that's never happened before. There's a greater cost that's going to get passed back in terms of finally a bigger inflated cost of producing our food. But what we want to talk about, yes, there's automation, there's efficiency, but at the end of the day, we're creating a new category of food. We highlighted it's more nutritionally dense. We highlighted there's different flavor profiles. We're highlighting that, again, it's not going to have the same kind of spoilage, that you would have with your traditional food. So we're changing the value proposition tremendously in terms of what the consumer. And so our lens is not necessarily a rush to the bottom line, but again, how do we deliver better value? I think just in terms of the economics from that standpoint. I think that answers one. There's a lot in Ryan's question.
There's a lot of, all the panelists can see a lot of questions, but he has a lot of questions. So
talking about animal agriculture specifically, I mean, the industry or the technology, if you want to look at it that way, hasn't changed or been innovated truly, and since we domesticated animals. Certainly we've got better, faster ways of producing it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're making progress in a forward way. So I think it's incumbent upon us to find ways to produce food, generally speaking, proteins definitely, because it's such an important macronutrient in ways that are orders of magnitude more efficient than what we're doing today. I mean, the rainforests are coming down in numbers that you can actually physically see from space, and it's gutting. So, you know, in some ways we have no choice.
I want to actually, so I'm going to go with Ryan. I'll leave Ryan on as my favorite, but I want to ask one last question, actually, which is a combination of a few of Nancy and Dr. Benjamin Ritter's, which is, you know, technology starts out so expensive. How long till vertical farming and lab grown protein are affordable solutions, such as the one Rick is leading and for what Joy work does, you know, and like what potential ways are there for the panelists to work together? Because I think everybody sort of felt like, wow, this is a great sort of circle of food and life and relationships. What would be, from the financial perspective, are they affordable now? At what point would they be? And what would be other potential ways, just sort of speculation? No business deals have to be drawn up from this conversation. And Rick and Joy, you guys can start first, or whoever has the thought.
I mean, I'll start first. I mean, easiest from our end, right? I mean, Rick knows I am looking for a way to have their programs be available in Central Texas. That's no secret. You know, I am all about reaching back into our supply chain and asking, which is half of my reason for being here, is to find new products and get those new products out, particularly in our programs, because I do believe no matter where you are in our stratified universe, you deserve to have good food available to you. And I would love the greens and products and produce that Aero Farms is offering. We've just got to find a way to be able to do that. And that comes back to the points I brought up at the beginning. They sounded maybe random, but they're not. When we start to talk about the issues of price transparency, it has to be able to come down the chain. There's an economics here that we all work to. There's a mechanism here that has to happen, and it happens over time. And we've got to find a way to shorten those times down the chain, those times to market. And that is part of what we try to do in the background. Yes, they're trying to create this product and this company and this product and bring these things, you know, I'm speaking here, use you guys, Mark, as an example of bringing this produce and finding innovative and optimal ways of creating these lettuces and these greens, right? But very quietly, it's the change in economic that I can get it eventually, right? In a way that's affordable, so then I can pass that on. And that's to me, that's the nut that's really still hard to crack. It's really, really hard to crack, because we don't have transparency between our hands, between the thing that is Aero out there and the thing to me. And that's one of the things that we have to fix in that supply chain. But that's a really long answer. Maybe, Mark, you have a shorter version of that answer.
Well, there's a lot of inherent complexity in it. But I mean, I think, you know, for a company, and what we've been trying to be focused on has been on large scale commercial farms so that we can drive the economics down and be able to feed more of the masses. We've been, you know, we've had school programs for over 10 years. We'd love to expand that even further. But again, it goes back to, as a company, you know, where do you focus first on? And we heard this theme of, you know, can we find the right partners? Our lens is always on that scale. So when we talk about working with the World Economic Forum and the healthy cities and communities, it's not just what we can do in Jersey City in that partnership, but then what we can do in cities all over the world. And so we're looking at, what are the right lenses and models to be able to apply that. There's also some questions just to kind of build on, the vertical farms and some of the different approaches. It can be at a very small scale. It just depends on what the business model is. And so if it's about growing your own food and self-sufficiency, that's fantastic in terms of like, if you're trying to really be able to have large scale implementations, then, it has some different economics associated with it. So there's some flexibility in the different business models of how you approach it too, and how you think about some of the different partners as well.
Yeah, I think my ad is, one, this forum is where it starts. The fact that we're talking, the fact that we, can meet other amazing do-gooders like Mark and Charles and Joy, it begins the connectivity of relationships. So I'd say that on the one, specifically U.S. Hunger. I like to say lately we're becoming more tech than food, or more food, we're food tech. And the platform that we're creating really is much more SaaS capable. The data is portable and connectivity. So we're really positioning ourselves as a lens to term called social determinants of health, right? Those things that really determine the health of a general population, and our ability to collect data that's focused in areas where people rather be discreet. And the data is really tell us your story. And there's so much when you just let a person free flow their story. And so we think that a lot of our ability to work with others is in being able to bring understanding to those populations. Almost 90% of our applicants are in food deserts, and we didn't seek them out, they found us. And so we think in many ways it's going to be in those places around information and technology that we can partner with the likes of Joy and Mark and Charles and others.